When The Walking Dead Season 2 hit our screens, some people were really satisfied seeing the personal character drama between our group and Hershel's group, seeing these people grow from who they were in Season 1 and how their time in the apocalypse changes their outlook and morality. Other people thought that the farm era of the show was a slog to get through, that nothing of importance really happened until the end, and it's a skippable season. And when the show first came out, I'll admit, I was one of the latter half of people. I was like 11 years old. I didn't care about the love triangle. I just wanted to see some zombie fights and action. The stuff at the barn was all just boring. Now that I'm over the age of 13, I have a much different perspective on the farm. Watching this season all at once, you'll see that it's actually paced incredibly well. The characters make decisions that further the story along bit by bit, but it ultimately all comes together or falls apart in the end. So I'm going to go over all the highlights, the lowlights, stuff that I really liked, and stuff that didn't really sit right with me. So let's try and look for Sophia, get a walker out of the well, and open the barn doors into Season 2 of The Walking Dead. One of the things about Season 2 that stuck out to me immediately was how big of a threat the walkers were. The herd passing through in episode 1 was genuinely nerve-wracking and such a tense and excellent scene. One walker was a tall task for Andrea to handle. Rick tells Sophia to stay put so he can take out 2 walkers, which ends up being a very bad idea. But at this point in the show, 2 walkers really did seem like a tall task. Now there's also the sense that our group is still new to this game, they aren't leveled up enough to take these things on with confidence, and getting comfortable and skilled at killing walkers all becomes part of their individual character growth, but there's still the Frank Darabont factor with these walkers. They were still monsters at this point, not just obstacles in the way. The dialogue is all around far superior than the first season. They fully lean into the character drama, which puts some people off because it wasn't the parts of the first season that they liked, but when it comes to the character arcs of this season, it's very clear this was the direction the show was always going to go in. Binge watching this season makes it not at all boring, but I feel like more compelling because the pacing is so much better. From this season onward, The Walking Dead feels like a streaming show, meaning it feels like a show that all the episodes were released at once and it was meant to be binge watched. In a lot of ways, I feel like this season in particular was really ahead of its time. There's a few characters who get an increased role this season, one of which is Daryl. The way they utilize Daryl in this season is excellent, and it's easy to see why Daryl started becoming the standout character and fan favorite. It's super impressive writing because they gave Daryl the only storyline that really worked for him to have, and that's to find Sophia. In the comics, Sophia never goes missing, and there's no such thing as Daryl. So to have such a big deviation from the comics this early on only worked if the audience cared about what's going on, and having this side character, who we didn't have the greatest opinion of at first, go out of his way to search for this girl that really doesn't mean anything to him, means everything to the audience. Daryl doesn't have a ton of lines, doesn't do a lot of talking, but his actions are far louder than anything he could possibly say to anyone. Chupacabra is a particular standout episode for Daryl, where he finds Sophia's doll and hallucinates the vision of Merle as he's injured trying to get back to the farm. He still does some, I'll say, uniquely Daryl things.
Look, he's wearing ears.
But ultimately becomes a very likable character. As the season goes on in the second half, Daryl is used as another wedge between Rick and Shane because Rick goes to look at Daryl as his right-hand man instead of Shane. Less is more with Daryl, it always has been, always will be, and they really understood that in this season. Carl also has an increased role, playing the annoying kid who wants to grow up too fast, and for that role, I think that he plays it well. His injury is really what sets the season in motion, the reason for them staying at the farm, Shane's derailment, and basically everything else that happens because our characters are forced to stay at the farm. He's a naive kid who doesn't have either one of his parents keep a close eye on him, so this eventually leads him to do what kids do, mess shit up. But honestly, watching this season, I had a lot of sympathy for Carl. He loses his only friend in the world and then wants to grow up to help out the others, but they don't really want him to, so he goes and does his own thing. I think this season sets up Carl to go on a nice character arc of his own in a few years. The seeds were all being planted here, even though they eventually took the character in a completely different direction, but I'll go over that when that time comes. Glenn gets an increased role because of his storyline with Maggie. There's winners and losers in the zombie apocalypse, people who end up better off than they were before, and people who can't handle the new world, and it eventually literally consumes them. And then there's Glenn, the nerdy pizza delivery boy who ends up getting Maggie. Now, a lot has been said about the Glenn and Maggie relationship, about how lucky he is, but those conversations died down over the years because everybody realized that Steven Yeun is a very handsome guy, and Glenn goes on to shed this pizza delivery boy personality. But I need to bring it back up, because back in season 2, this was not Glenn. This was not Glenn, and this was certainly not Glenn. Glenn was each and every one of the lonely nerds watching this show, a character we could all see ourselves as, and for him to get a girl like Maggie, he was a goddamn hero. So for that, I salute you, Glenn. But there's only one reason why this relationship works, and it is believable as it is, and that's the chemistry between Steven Yeun and Lauren Cohen. These two end up becoming such an unlikely yet beautiful pairing, and it's one of the only breaths of happiness in this season, and really for seasons to come. Talking about season 2, I obviously have to mention Hershel, played by the late Scott Wilson. Hershel is easily the best character introduced this season. He starts the season off doing everything he can to help our group, being a man of God and still praying for the world. But as the season goes on, his secrets are uncovered, and we learn that Hershel isn't all that aware of how bad the world is. He thinks of the walkers as people still, and that kind of thinking just ends up getting you killed. By the end of the season, Hershel is a changed man, and even though he's changed his mindset in a few ways, he becomes the moral compass and really the dad of the whole group. Scott Wilson was an excellent actor and elevates every single scene that he's in, and I truly cannot give him enough praise. We get to see a few different flashback scenes from before the apocalypse, which is always cool to see our characters before we really met them on screen and how they eventually got where they are. The first one is Shane telling Lori what happened to Rick while she's waiting to pick up Carl from school. Lori's talking to one of her friends about her marriage with Rick and how things aren't going too smooth. It's really the inverse of the opening scene in the pilot of Rick talking to Shane about his marriage with Lori. But this time it's not like seeing two different sides of the argument. What Rick was saying about how Lori said something so cruel in front of Carl and how he'd never say that was exactly what Lori said to her friend and how she was wrong for saying it. Then Shane shows up, tells her about Rick and how he's been shot, and she realizes that the last conversation that she had with her husband was not a great one, and now she has to tell Carl. We also get to see the first bombing of Atlanta, and really how the group all met each other on the highway in the first place. But mostly what these scenes are setting up is Shane's involvement with Rick's family. At the start of the season, there is an internal struggle in Shane. He's in love with Lori, but he also genuinely does care about Rick. A lot of people are under the impression that Season 1 Shane and Season 2 Shane are completely different people, which is true for the most part, but it's not like his character just changes overnight. Well, it is, but it's not like there's not a reason for his change. When he kills Otis to get the supplies back to Carl, his whole mindset changes. I don't think Shane was mentally prepared for the toll this would actually take on him. He talks to Andrea about this, saying that sometimes you have to live with the choices you make and move on from them or else you're gonna die. I think a lot of Shane's characteristics and choices this season stem from how uncomfortable he is about how things went down with Otis. It affects all aspects of his life. It further drives him against Rick, furthers his feelings for Lori, and causes the whole outburst at the bar. He knew this group needed a villain, and he was okay with being that villain because he himself felt like the villain. Maybe you think I'm giving Shane too much credit, that he was just insane from the start and the whole Otis situation popped the lid off of that, but if you go back and watch those episodes right after Otis's death, Shane is a changed person, a much darker and lonelier person than he was before, and a few episodes later he becomes villain Shane because he just doesn't know how to process his own decisions. With all that being said, when we get to the episode Pretty Much Dead Already, Shane is 100% correct about everything. The way he goes about it, not so much, but if he hadn't had this outburst and forced everyone to kill the walkers, they would have been dead very quickly. because Rick wasn't changing a damn thing. Rick, while he had differing opinions than Hershel on the walkers still being people, he was gonna go along with Hershel, bringing more walkers into the barn until eventually this would be the death of all of them. All it takes is one mistake, one mishap, and the barn full of walkers would have escaped and killed everybody if they weren't ready for it. And Rick absolutely 100% would have let this happen. Rick in this season is far too busy trying to please both sides. He wants to be the good guy, the glue that holds everybody together, but Shane realizes that that's not gonna work. When he tells Lori that Rick ain't built for this world, he's not wrong. This version of Rick Grimes would have definitely gotten the whole group killed eventually. But when Shane opens the barn, demonstrates how walkers aren't people anymore, it changes the dynamic of the group entirely. The episode Nebraska showcases this perfectly. The group gets split on what Shane did. Some people like Andrea and T-Dog admire him and thank him for what he did because it was for the better, while others are appalled and think that it was the wrong thing of him to do. Regardless of whether Shane was or wasn't right, he starts causing rifts in the group, and once that starts, it takes somebody who's willing to make the hard choices to bring everybody back together. Enter Rick, we don't kill the living, Grimes, making those hard decisions at the bar later that day. The bar scene is absolutely fantastic, mostly because of how subtle everything is. When they run into these guys, it's not painted on their foreheads that they're bad guys like most of the people they run into later are, but there's a few things that they say about how they haven't had a girl in a while, about how they've had to do horrible things just to get by, that gives Rick the indication that something's off, and he makes a decision that if he had made it literally 1 second later, he'd be dead. This is the moment that Rick stops trying to be the good guy. This is the moment that he stops trying to be everybody's friend, because after this, he has no problem sticking up to Shane, making those decisions that are for the best and keeping everybody else alive. In a lot of ways, Rick's killing and Shane's killing of Otis mirror each other. They both change our characters and prove that it's actually Rick who's built for this world, not Shane. Also, side note, when they get attacked at the bar, Hershel ends up killing one of the dudes in their party. Imagine surviving in an apocalypse for a good amount of time just to end up getting taken out by an 80-year-old drunk guy. Don't know why, but that made me laugh. Now I feel like it's time to talk about the elephant in the room. Lori. A lot has been said about Lori over the years, and just about all of it is fully warranted, but also a lot of the stuff with Lori comes from a place of hatred or thinking that the character wasn't all that great, and with that, I disagree. Two things can be true at the same time. Lori can be a terrible mother, a terrible spouse, manipulative and frustrating to watch, while also still being a great character. Watching this again, I think that Lori is trying her best to keep everybody happy and be helpful to those around her. She just goes about it in the worst possible way. In a lot of ways, she reminds me of Catelyn Stark, who does the exact same thing, trying to make the best decisions, but actually ends up making the worst decisions. Lori is a character that actually isn't built for this world. She can't make those tough decisions once she's already in a situation that she got herself into. I truly don't blame Lori for getting with Shane when she thought Rick was dead. I don't. Was it a little early in the apocalypse to totally forget your husband? Yes, it was. But we also don't have any point of reference to judge her on, because the apocalypse is the apocalypse. You think you're gonna die like every second of every day, and Shane was there for them. He took care of them, so it's probably just mentally easier to divert your feelings of grief from your dead husband by clinging onto somebody else, especially somebody that not only reminds you of your husband, but is going out of his way to keep you safe. That all makes sense, and I don't blame Lori for that at all. But what I do blame Lori for is trying to please everybody in the second season. Her and Rick are both guilty of this, but Shane says he wants to leave because he can't have Lori and there's no place for him anymore. But she tells him to stay, giving Shane some sort of hope that there might be a future there. Rick kills those guys in Nebraska because they posed a threat, and Lori tells Rick that Shane poses a similar threat, so what's he gonna do to protect his family? Lori thanks Shane for saving her and Carl and says that what they had together wasn't one-sided. Rick kills Shane, fulfilling a request that Lori basically made, and she can't even look at Rick after that. In one of my earlier videos, I forget which one, I said that Lori gets a bad rap and doesn't play Rick and Shane against each other, but after watching this season in its entirety again, that's exactly what she does. But I also don't think it's intentional. I think, similarly to Shane, Lori doesn't know how to deal with the consequences of her actions. I think that she was hoping that everything would kind of just go away and all the drama would be dealt with if she kept on playing nice to everybody involved, but that's not how the world works, especially this world. And on top of inciting more rage between Rick and Shane, she can't keep her eyes on Carl if her life depended on her. Lori getting mad at Rick for killing Shane is hugely hypocritical, but the scene also makes it seem like maybe she's mad at him because Carl is the one who actually had to put him down, when she was the one who was supposed to be watching him. She really just never has any leverage in her arguments, and that's across the whole season. I ultimately think Lori was a very necessary character, but it felt like the writers kept on flip-flopping on what they wanted her to do and who they wanted her to be, so she ended up being this hypocritical and aggravating character. The second half of the season and the whole Randall situation is written and executed to perfection. It reminds me of the same storyline from Breaking Bad when they have to decide what to do with the guy who survived and their moral dilemma in the whole situation. It's a storyline that only really works in the beginning of the apocalypse because our characters are struggling to preserve the old world and their old moral compass, but also realize that tough decisions need to be made in order to survive in this new world. 18 Miles Out is the culmination of events set up from the very first episode. Things finally come to a head between Rick and Shane. They fight over what to do with Randall after he says that he knows who Maggie is. Shane thinks that they should just kill him, but Rick says they need to go over a new plan, so they start fighting, but the real reason why they're fighting is a bit more obvious. You know, Shane dirtied their new 2011 Hyundai Tucson. But while this is a good episode, it's also incredibly strangely paced with two very different conflicting storylines. But Rick eventually gets his way and they bring Randall back to the farm. The conversation about keeping Randall alive really encapsulates the whole season. The debate about morality in this world and how it's changed in the opinion of the majority, how people who are stuck living in the old world aren't gonna last here in this new one. These are all themes that represent this season, and having it all culminate in this moment, this one conversation about a man's life they're so willing to take and the one person who's against it, shows how different the group is now and the path that they're going down. It's also one of the most beautifully acted scenes by Jeffrey DeMunn, and heartbreaking because of what happens a few minutes later. Dale died knowing that the world he knew was gone. Shane's death comes at the proper moment and obviously signifies a great change in Rick. I remember there being talks of a deleted scene or something along those lines of like how Shane's gun wasn't actually loaded and he wanted Rick to kill him, which would have been cool, but I ultimately don't think that was Shane's true intentions. He definitely was there to kill Rick. Having him come back alive and Carl being the one to finally end it was also a great scene, one that, again, had Lori lose sight of her son despite all of them being confined to the house. The Walker herd attacking the farm shows all of them how brutal the world truly is. How they were really just biding their time staying at the farm in this wide open area with no true fortifications. And then we see just how far Rick progressed this season when he says that they are not a democracy anymore, they are in a Ricktatorship. He's done playing both sides and making everybody happy. It's his way or the highway, and they can either get on board or leave. This is at times great for the group, and other times not so much. But we'll get to see more of that in Season 3. I'm gonna give Season 2 of The Walking Dead a solid 8.7 out of 10. And those are my thoughts on Season 2. What do you think? Is this season a slow burn, or is it just boring? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave it a like and subscribe, and tune in next month to see my video on Season 3. Special shout out to all my channel members, and for you guys, be on the lookout for my Season 3 video soon. I'm actually almost done with it, so you'll see it early. If you want to see videos early like them, you can hit the join button to become a member. If you do, then I'll see you in the next one.